already kind of introduced that. So we're going to start with the building trades here, as I said. And so first I'll quickly introduce our panel and thank them for taking their time. Troy Milne is the business manager for Local 46 Sheet Metal Workers. Troy's been a member of Smart Local 46 since 1986, and as business manager, financial secretary, treasurer of Smart Local 46, he oversees close to 120 million in assets and trust funds, including a joint apprenticeship training committee. So thank you, Troy, for being with us. Next is, have the next slide, please. And just a reminder, if you have noise behind you, please try to mute yourself, even if you're on the panel, and then come in when you need to. Next is Rick Nortz. He's with Mitsubishi Electric Train, HVAC, US. Rick is the Senior Marketing Manager of Utility and Efficiency Programs for Mitsubishi Electric Train. And Rick works with efficiency programs on the East Coast to help develop and promote programs to Mitsubishi Electric supply chain, including distributors and contractors. Next slide, please. And you'll see there, Vincent Rosario is the VRF Regional Account Manager at Johnson Controls. He's got over 39 years in the HVAC industry. Vincent has held many different roles, including technical, sales, and management, and has worked with a wide variety of products and services. And then, let's see. Lastly, if you'll switch the slide again to, oh, yep, you got it, is Vincent Alvarez, is president of the New York City Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO. And in addition to this role, he previously served as the assistant legislative director of the New York State AFL-CIO, spearheading various worker-related policy initiatives throughout the state. So welcome. I think that's our, we have another person or not? Go to the next slide, please. Nope, that's it. Oh, so here's a top level. I've not seen this list, so I'll walk through this with you. Here's a top level that the NYSERDA team grabbed as gaps out of the first session. So out of those first speed presentations, if you will. Here's some gap themes: improving energy code enforcement, and especially upstate. Train organizations, not individuals. Budgets leave and might not have the ability to affect timelines and budgets. Retrofits need an army of project managers, owners, reps, need to be good at soliciting impacts. Big and small ones are still using a bidder list from decades ago when the lists don't align. What are they looking for? Not enough good union jobs, not enough women in the workforce. People don't think these jobs are real, and the marketplace needs strong outreach and education. Is that the only page of this, or do we have more? Next slide.
This is the only page.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. So let's go to the next slide, or is it just going to questions? Is that next?
Yep, just to questions.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll leave these gaps up here for all of you and for the panel as things we can build upon. And so let's engage in a conversation with our four panelists. And the first question I'd like to pose to the panel is to have you talk about what the social justice aspects and impacts on the workforce and labor unions are. What are the social justice aspects and impacts on workforce and labor unions? Who would like to start the conversation?
This is Vinny Alvarez. I'll jump in. And thanks, Scott. I appreciate the remarks that I've heard and the comments from the panelists during the day. And I appreciate you all doing this. I would say that we in the labor movement, in Climate Jobs New York, we got involved. We look at like social justice aspects and impacts on workforce and labor unions. We got involved in this work locally in New York City because of many years ago, because we saw an impact of climate change, and we saw the real personalized impact of weather-related events like Hurricane Sandy, downstate, Hurricane Irene upstate, Hurricane Maria with a large Puerto Rican population in New York City that a lot of the building trades and other unions aided in the efforts there. It personalized climate change and was really about our community being hurt. Labor is part of the community. Labor and community are interconnected. So there for us is naturally going to be a social justice aspect to that. Many of the neighborhoods that are on frontline communities are where the lion's share of our members live. The goal of our organization at Climate Jobs New York is to address this dual crisis of inequality and climate change inequality through the creation of good jobs, which will deal not just with the charity that people need, but also with the social justice aspect of it, creating a good career path where they will need less charity. So we see that as real social justice component of this. We want to help those marginalized workers in the communities living with this reality for too long and remaining vulnerable to both issues of climate change and inequality, and work in coalitions across community, with community groups, environmental justice organizations, and unions to accomplish things like large building retrofits, and efficiency mandates, offshore wind. We've made progress, and that's been spoken about, and renewable generation. And so that's where we see really our intersection, where we continue to do our work.
Great, thank you. Troy, would you like to add to that?
I'm not sure if am I muted still?
No, we've got you.
Oh, okay. I have 3 questions when I have somebody come talk to me about wanting to become a member. And I usually finalize the question with, how many 1/16ths of an inch are in 3/8 of an inch. And when you can't read a tape measure in any trade, that's the start. That's what we're dealing with the identification of tools and the soft skills in construction, which starts right in the high school, and we try to work with that right out of the gate. Now, Rochester, New York's a little different than what I'm hearing from New York City, especially in the sheet metal world. We're ahead of the curve. We do address the energy factor here. I like Mark's comments early with Poly and what's going down in Utica. We're doing that here. Bausch and Lomb is a big project that's going on. So as long as we continue to work on getting the goals and the minorities and women into it, we don't have a problem getting it done, but we do have a problem retaining. So the obstacles I'm hearing are tough. Going to be tough for us to get through, but we'll do it. There's a lot of tools I don't think are being utilized, as we heard a lot of questions earlier about code enforcement, and that's my first thought process here. If we're going to start spending this money to encourage getting over to the green lead, how do we monitor it? And we just got through the Department of Labor a modified apprenticeship program, and it's going to start with a 1 to 2 year program that, in my personal opinion, we need to come up with a way to get data to prove that a building is now gone green lead. They are savings, and this involves the windows, the doors, the ceiling of foundations, etc. So I think where we have to start is to train how NYSERDA is going to get their data to prove that we're heading in the right direction. I heard earlier this could either go one way or the other. Well, what's the start? We got to figure out a way to substantiate meeting the green lead. So as far as the students, I think we have a mechanism in place to get us going on the entry level of learning how to communicate with customers, learning how to retrieve the data, present the data, maybe replace equipment, etc. in sales. And as these entry-level people start to see what they're doing and the effects of what they're trying to accomplish, they want to move up. So a 1 year apprenticeship program becomes a 2 year apprenticeship program to a 4 to a 5. So not only would this help cut our costs in our trying to meet our goals, but some people are satisfied, like we're saying, they want to be happy in doing what they're doing. If somebody's happy going to do a blower door test on a residential home and that $17 an hour plus benefits is what they're looking to get, then why should we hold somebody back from doing that as long as we're matching our goal of trying to become a green league? So I know I'm getting a little off base because I'm getting crammed with a lot of information here today, and I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think the one thing we're missing is if there's public money going towards a project in New York State, we can address the diversity. You can address making a green lead. So if I'm going to give public money to a project, and we discussed non-union union, if you're going to get public money, you should be meeting a standard, especially if we have a goal of 2050. This already has to start years ago. You know, and the only way we do that is through data and through watchdogs making sure. I had personally experienced sitting on the IDA board here in Rochester, a building getting discounts on buying high efficiency equipment. And that equipment and that duct system was installed so wrong, there's no way it was going to meet a standard that equipment was designed to meet. So here, you got to understand there's different levels of integrity that's not being monitored right now. And that's my biggest concern. I think that's where it starts.
Thanks, Troy. Either of the other panelists want to hop in on this first question?
Yeah, this is Rick Norris with Mitsubishi Electric. When I think of social justice, I think about opportunity, and this industry and the clean energy, clean heating and cooling industry, as a whole, I've been to different seminars in New York that approximately 50% of the current workforce will be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. So that spells nothing but opportunity for me. And obviously there's no restrictions for anyone to get into the trades other than the training that they would need. And with the goals that the states have, one of the slides earlier, you talked about $450 million dedicated to heat pumps. So we're talking about big goals, big opportunity, and in order for this work to get done, we're going to need the workers. So somebody earlier talked about create the work and the jobs will come and the workers will come. I totally agree with that. So
great. Well, let me move us along to the second question. And Vincent Matarazzo, I'm going to start with you. Are there carbon intensive professions where displaced workers might be trained to do retrofit work or trained in solutions for building decarbonization and electrification? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I can address this.
Okay, Troy, go ahead.
So SMART is International Foundation. There's multiple. We have NEMI, National Energy Management Institute, NEB, National Environmental Balancing Bureau, NATE, North American Technician of Excellence, NYSERDA, obviously, TAB, Testing, Adjusting, and Balancing Bureau. We have all the mechanisms in place to train people to these retrofits. They've been around. These been around for years. So we have the mechanisms. We just aren't utilizing to their potential.
So Troy, you feel like as we move people from carbon intensive professions over to the clean energy economy, that we can bring them along through the just transition with the sort of initiatives that we already have. Is that what I heard you say?
Correct.
Great.
So
Thank you.
one of your, it's all about substantiation. So if we can test and balance the system to its maximum efficiency, and we can take somebody that's been an installer of a system that understands positive pressure, negative return air, makeup air, and he can get in or she can get in and the technician can balance the system, we can train that. We have that in place, and there's numbers along with the roofing, siding, and enclosure, the building envelope. Without a building envelope being tight and right, the mechanics of a building aren't going to run to, and you're never going to reach a goal if it's not Titan right buildings from the start.
Sure. So what type, go ahead, hop in.
Scott,
No, I was muted there. I couldn't get unmuted, but I got.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So, yeah, when you say carbon intensive professions, I mean, can you clarify that a little bit? Like, what exactly do you mean by, like, the question is kind of like a little skewed.
So my read of that, and I'm not the expert here, but my read of that would be, you know, people that maintain oil boilers and natural gas systems, and those are, you know, propane systems, you know, those sorts of professions that are
And
currently.
then switching over to do like VRF and mini splits. Is that like
Yeah.
the?
That's my
so-
read of this question.
Yeah, sure. There's definitely a lot of opportunity for that. The key thing is the awareness in the public for VRF and mini splits is very poor. 90% of the people or customers that you talk to out there, whether it's commercial or residential, I'll tell you that they don't even really know what a VRF or a mini split system is. So there seems to be a lot of focus on this from the wrong angle. The real approach here should be to focus on public awareness. And when the customers, when the general public has a full understanding of how ductless and electrification works, how VRF and mini systems function, and that they're comfortable that their electric bill is going to be lower, or the fact that it's going to heat under low ambient conditions. When the customers feel comfortable with this, there's going to be more of a need for this type of equipment. That's what I'm seeing out in the field. Then we'll have more of a need for training and people that want to get trained, because then the work will be there. A lot of contractors are stuck in limbo here, where you know, most of their work is gas and oil. Maybe not so much oil right now, but it's definitely a carbon-based heating system. And they're doing VRF and mini splits where they can. So it's very hard to focus a lot of your efforts and dollars in training people, or people getting trained, when the work isn't there. That's what I'm seeing.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else want to hop into this question?
yes, Scott, this is Vinny Alvarez. I think there's just two quick points that I like to make. Is that the first is I would say is that we should create pathways so that any transition doesn't lead to displaced workers where possible. And when they are displaced, you're working with unions in those industries to create you know, new agreements in any of the new segments of the industry, you know, that to have family sustaining union jobs there, good, you know, family sustaining jobs there. Hopefully they're union jobs if we're transitioning from one union job. And the second thing I would say is we should be thinking about the supply chain as well on a lot of these, because and how to capture as much of the renewable supply chain as possible. So we're not just creating jobs through renewable projects, but building retrofits, etc., but also in the components necessary for each of those places as well. I think the pandemic that we're going through now, there's got to be a lot of focus as well on domestic manufacturing. And I think any of these industries that we're transitioning to, there's also going to be an opportunity for economic development as we create clean energy jobs with some domestic manufacturing.
Great. Thanks, Vinny. Anyone else on this one? There was a question that came in that's related, and Michaela Topi from Emerald Cities Collaborative asks, how can we make these decarbonization trainings accessible for low-income contractors? Any thoughts on that? We're going to transition people through from high-intensive professions to this new economy. You know, how do we make that happen for lower-income contractors? Any thoughts from anybody?
Well, smart always. I mean, all the unions entertain low income contractors, I guess I'm not understanding, because once you're associated with the union, no matter if you're high or low, anybody that wants to get any training, it's available. That's what we do. That's part of half of the function of the union is training. So I'm kind of why we're being specific to low income contracts.
Well, it was more related to the first question. It was about the social justice aspect, I think, Troy. So thank you for that, though. Yep, appreciate it.
Well, and Gary touched on this a little bit earlier. In Rochester, we've started a MAP program, multi-craft apprenticeship preparation program. That's basically the soft skills that we're talking about in construction, to read a tape measure, handle a saw, know what a crescent wrench to a side cutter to whatever tool. We've already got this program in place, but once again, it's not recruitment as a problem, it's retention. You know, you can put somebody on a job, and then 6 months later that job's done. Oh, that was 3 miles from my house. Now this one's 15 miles from my house. I just can't make it work, or the height, or there might be just another factor that it's an obstacle for us to train anybody. But the multi-apprentice program, it is very successful, and it is an option for the contractors to make some goals if they are on diversified projects with minority and women goals.
So this notion of retention as a gap has come up a couple times, and it wasn't on the list from the earlier session. But let's talk about that. We're talking about what can we do about it here with training, and so ideas from the panel about, you know, how do we have our training programs reach past the pass off to placement and assist with retention? Is there anything going on in New York on that front? What should we how should we address that retention piece from a training perspective? Any of you? Any thoughts? I know that's a bit off the map, but that's because it came up off the map.
This is Vinny. I'll just jump in, Alvarez, real quick. You know, the amount, Gary spoke at length about the amount of money that is invested both in hours and dollars that the unions put in to training. And I think that the whole concept there is that if you're training not just for a job, but if you're training for a career path, a long-term career path, and you're training and allowing your workers, you're developing workers that are acquiring a skill set along with wages and benefits that is going to help retain and attract workers for these career fields. I mean, for me, it's remarkable, and it speaks volumes when you see people camping out, literally, you know, people with college degrees that are camping out trying to get an opportunity at these jobs because they realize that that an organization is going to invest in them. They're going to invest in them with first-class training. They're going to invest in them and make sure they're fighting for family-sustaining wages and health benefits and retirement security for them at a level that makes it very attractive. So I think one of the most basic things that we could do is support career paths which are going to make it both attractive to workers, to both attract and retain workers. And I think we've done it in a lot of cases.
So address retention by getting people on a longer term career path, which some of the speakers in the earlier session spoke to. I like that idea, Vinny. Thank you.
Correct.
I want to keep us moving along to get to some of these questions. Rick, I'm going to bring this next one to you first, and then others can jump in. But the question is, New York State needs to meet the labor needs associated with the 2025 New York Clean Heat goal. What are vocational and training institutions are needed for the long-term transformation to fundamentally change the way we heat and cool buildings? So you're in this space at Mitsubishi Train. What do we need to do?
So the manufacturers all offer training, but the one issue that we have is that it's not entry-level training. So by the time they attend training with manufacturers, they need to have some kind of base level of knowledge. So obviously step one, get more people into the industry. There's obviously a couple of different ways you can do that. During vocational schools would be one. Then on the job training, would be obviously one of the primary ways to doing it. And I saw a couple of things earlier where NYSERDA, I believe it was NYSERDA, will actually pay 75% for the first 6 months. So I will be making sure that I get the word out to our contractors about those kind of programs. So really just getting more people in to realize that most of this equipment, it's all getting computerized. So a lot of times, when people think of this industry, they're thinking, getting their hands dirty and things like that. But in a lot of cases, you're dealing with controls, you're dealing with high level computers that are involved just to fix the equipment. So it's a lot different industry than people think.
Great. Anyone want to hop in on Rick's points or add to them?
Yeah, actually, Rick actually touched on a great point, which is vocational training. I grew up in New Jersey, and public technical and vocational high schools are commonplace in New Jersey. I went to Passaic County Technical Institute, and I studied HVAC for 4 years. And I think going into the trade at a very young age prepares you and gives you that basic knowledge that Rick had mentioned, so that when you graduate high school and you get out into the workforce, working for a contractor, which is exactly what I did, is the path I was on. Now going to that advanced manufacturer training and continuing on into controls training and those sorts of pathways, you already have a basic understanding. So I think the short answer to that question is perhaps the state and the cities should offer more in the way of public vocational high schools for the trades. That seems to have totally gone away in the last 20 years.
Great. Thanks, Vincent. All right, let's try to hit one more before we move on to our next panel. And I would just say to those listening, you probably have noticed that by the questions I'm prompting people with, I'm trying to pick through the comments section here, and the pieces that are relevant to this training piece, I'm trying to weave into our questioning. So feel free to keep dropping comments, and I'll do my best to try to get the pieces that fit under this kind of training piece that I can. So last question, and I'll lay it out for whoever wants to hop in, is are there existing training programs that focus on new building electrification programs? And if so, can you tell us about them? So if we're going to do an all electric building, if you will, new building electrification programs, new construction, right? Anything going on in that space, or is that something we've got to address?
This is Vinny Alvarez. I'll just make just one quick point. I know that this is an industry, it's an industry by industry approach to some of these things, but with respect to new building electrification programs, I know affiliates like the IVW, that's the union I'm from, and other unions too that are out there. This isn't just about them, but since we can talk about electrification, that made retrofits and efficiency a huge component of their training and marketability of for their contractors and their workforce. So we get back to this, incorporating, and making sure that states and cities are working with training programs, and make sure those training programs are training their workers and their contractors to be able to both manufacture in some cases, but certainly install and maintain the newest forms of technology that are out there.
Great. Thanks, Vinny. Anyone want to add to that?
Scott, I think one of the most disappointing things is when you drive by a windmill farm and 10% are spinning, the other 90 due to the fact of whatever gear or whatever issues, that it doesn't seem like the technology for the air right now has gotten to the point where it's being utilized to what it was designed to do.
Thanks for that, Troy. I think with that, I'm going to thank this panel. I think most of them hopefully will be around when we get to our broader conversation at the end. So we may be able to get some more questions to them then. Keep sending in comments, and thank all four of you very much. Appreciate it. And we're now going to hop into our building operators panel. And thank you all. So let's see. We've got, just get ready to give you some intros here quickly. Good. So let me introduce the panel to you all. First, we've got Robert Muldoon, and he's the manager for Green Building Training Program at 32BJ Training Fund. The training fund provides training for the nation's largest building service workers union, local 32BJ SEIU. Next up, if you flip the slide, we've got Adam Romano. Adam is a senior building systems consultant with Stephen Winters Associates. His work at SWA focuses on building performance analysis, conducting energy audits, and commissioning, design, and implementation of high-performance HVAC systems, and instructional design and training delivery. And next slide, please. Next, we've got Karen B. Donahoe, who is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Capital Facilities at SUNY System Administration. Karen has years of experience in field of facilities management and has SUNY-wide system responsibilities for energy management, energy purchasing, sustainability, environmental health and safety, emergency management, residential and community college, capital management, asset management, real estate, startup, New York, and capital process and procedures. And then let's see, lastly, you'll flip the slide one more time. We have Michael Bobker. Michael is the executive director of the CIUS Building Performance Lab at the City University of New York. The BPL engages in collaborative research, stakeholder engagement, and workforce development in the area of building operations for energy efficiency, specifically for municipal clients. So welcome to you all to this panel. Appreciate your being here. Are we putting those gaps back up for them to be able to see? I believe we are. Yep. So I'm not going to, or are they different? Let's see. Are they different for this crew?
Nope, they're the same.
The same. Good. Thank you. I want to make sure if I needed to read them again. So welcome to you all. Appreciate your joining this panel, and let's hop in. And the first question here is considering the gaps identified in session one, which you see on the screen here, how does your organization address the following, and to what extent, if any, workforce training facilities, vocational schools, higher ed coursework, clean energy internship programs, and on-the-job training programs? Who'd like to hop in?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about 32BJ's.
Robert, come on in. Yeah,
Okay.
come on in.
I can tell you a little bit about 32BJ's program. We're training the incumbent workers, people currently in jobs. And we've been developing this for over 10 years. I came on back in 2009 to broaden the Green Buildings Training Program. And we've focused on just the core concepts around building operation. And that's been a successful formula for us. In other words, focusing on building envelope, lighting efficiency, quality and controls, heating and ventilation concepts and efficiency strategies, and indoor environmental quality. And we just focus on those, but in originally expanding the program, but then we, with the help of NYSERDA and with some of it, we've gone on to develop a series of courses for residential and commercial green building operators. And they've actually gone beyond that. We now have added lead professional training because our folks have expressed interest in it. We've learned from doing this, or what I've seen, is our folks need basically four things. They need the core concepts, they need access to the tools, they need to understand the programs and the incentives around energy efficiency, and they need the certifications. And one thing I just want to add, Ellen Honigstock had mentioned this in her presentation. It's important to train the whole organization because we train we'll train aspiring superintendents as well as superintendents on energy efficiency back to their buildings, and the managers will say, we're not interested, we're not going to do that, the boards will say it, etc. And I always tell them that they're going to get there, but it's a little discouraging, and we know that that's the other half of the equation. And the other thing that we see in New York City is we have some new drivers on the horizon. We now have energy grades are going to be going on the buildings come this fall. And of course, we have greenhouse gas targets. This is all part of the New York City Climate Mobilization Act. And we know that's going to start to drive change in the buildings. It already has. And they'll bring in third parties for those, for recommendations to meet those targets, to up their grade. But they're going to need the union building workers to be involved if these improvements are going to stick and they're going to maintain the performance of the building. So we see the shift starting to a performance-based operations.
Great. Thank you. Karen, it sounded like you wanted to come in earlier.
Yes, thank you. So I want to say ditto about the point about organization. It's really critical that the organization understands and is supportive of everything that's going to happen. The challenge for us is, as we are doing this now in the SUNY system and facilities management, there's a lot of one-off trainings happening. So this employee might get trained, that employee might get trained, but, and there was some great stuff that I just heard all day today about all the great training that's out there. But the challenge is we're sort of in a bit of a chicken and an egg, because do you train the staff on this new technology, or do you put the new technology in and then train the staff? And you really have to do them both at the same time, but that's not what's happening. So we can train staff, but then they don't have enough of that technology to be able to continue to actually learn and hone their skills. So yeah, they get excited, yeah, that's great, and then they go back and they keep doing the same thing over again with their existing old equipment. So I think it's really hard to sort of get to the point where the training is meaningful and that they can actually start to even train other employees as part of their work when they come back from going to these great trainings.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to hop in?
Yeah, I will, Scott. Mike Bopker. The previous comments are dead on. I want to clarify one ambiguity. Building operators, variously interpreted as the guy who is down at the boiler, pushing the buttons on the boiler. He is the, in one sense, the building operator. In the broader sense of the building operator, it goes all the way up to managerial levels. And so that person is important too in this whole organization sense. That is a key point. The building operators, as in the guys on the plant floor, are, they're very physically oriented, and training needs to be very visceral. We do a lot of book training. Where we can blend it with experience back in the building, that works okay. But where it's new technology, as Karen pointed out, where it's new technology, it doesn't grab as well. And, so a big gap here on the kind of training organization is that there need to be more training labs. Someone mentioned in the previous panel, vocational schools. Well, they're gone, largely gone, and we don't have that lab infrastructure anymore. That needs to be rebuilt. This might be a good time to think about that. And also, I think we have to think about training not as a numbers game. So, we can throw up big numbers. The Urban Green Council has trained 36,000 people in, relatively short training, not always, not consistently, but the list that NYSERDA has dozens and dozens of trainings that look to be like lunch and learns. And they certainly have a purpose, they certainly have a function, but I think we have to, be careful about making this into a numbers game as opposed to what people are really learning and being able to carry forward. We need some lifelong learning concepts. Ellen mentioned coaching. That needs to be a model going forward from internships and existing workers. It needs to have a lifelong learning model that we use.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, this is Adam. I would just jump in and echo Michael's comments. I think, what we've seen at SWA providing training to building operators, and we've seen in the last few years with NYSERDA support, on-site training, customized training to, their systems and the unique issues and roadblocks and sort of skills gaps that, the operators have has been very, very successful. And I think, going to Ellen's point of, training organizations and back to Rick's point that, we have an aging population, especially in the building operations profession. We have, a tremendous amount of personnel that are going to retire in 5 to 10 years. And we really need to make sure that there is sufficient knowledge transfer between those folks that have been in the buildings for 20, 30 years to the new folks that are coming in, and that, we are helping the organizations with onboarding and trying to standardize their operation practice and really making sure that there is a good way of preparing new folks for entering into the workforce and making them successful.
Great. Well, let me build on this. You started talking, the last couple of you, about the gaps, and we heard a bit of that in the last panel as well with the VocTech. So let's talk about what the significant gaps look like in continuing ed opportunities for existing staff. What do those gaps look like from your perspectives? Michael, I think you raised kind of this in a way, so why don't I come to you first?
Okay, well, there of course is the gap that I referred to about hands-on facilities. Some of our training topics that we address very well with professionals, like the building envelope, don't really have the same kind of treatment for building operators. But as we go to tighten the buildings, if we actually do go to passive house type technologies to reduce the energy consumption before we electrify, then we will find that ventilation systems become very, very important, much more critical to the operation of buildings. Now we have, even when we have a tight building, it's relatively loose by passive house standards. And so mechanical ventilation and distributed mechanical ventilation becomes much more critical. And we do not have training around that is at the operations level, for example. So I think that's, there's a gap there. There is a gap too, not about kinds of structures, but about how we as trainers understand what we should train for. And, traditionally, trainers look to the employer, the employer to say what they need people to be able to do. But we seem to be operating in a little bit of a void in that respect. And we're kind of guessing at what we think people should need to do. So people mentioned career ladders. The industry specification of tasks could be better. That's another kind of gap that's not up here.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else on this question want to hop in?
Yeah, this is Karen. So I think one of those things that's missing is sort of that understanding by the staff who are being trained of the big picture, understanding both why this is important, that this is a really big movement that has a lot of good reason behind it. So there's that big picture that they're not always getting, and then really understanding that how they can actually be a major part of that what they do is important and can actually make a difference. And I think some of that also is lacking. I will say that we do have at SUNY quite a bit of vocational training that still occurs at our community colleges, and we still do have some of the old style units for HVAC training, etc. I'm not sure that even that training has been updated to enough of the clean energy style of work that we need to be training for this new energy staff.
Great. Anyone else? I would note that we did have a comment from Andres Proeta He's with the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 30, and he speaks about with pride about their training apprenticeship program. He notes that they're members of building engineers and operators continue their training through their unions. So just to add that he believes that a piece of this is covered that we've spoken about. Anyone else on this particular topic? All right, Adam, I'm going to pivot back to you because I think this next question builds on where you left off in your previous comment. The question is, what does new training infrastructure look like as we move forward, and what resources do we need as we move forward? So, if we need to train more people in new things, what's the actual infrastructure to do that training look like from your perspective?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think, to Michael's point, I think we do need an increased amount of labs. We need physical equipment we can work on. We can, provide the training on these new technologies. I think if we can get more, these systems deployed in buildings, we can do that. But I think, a critical piece will be building out, some additional new training infrastructure that way. I also think for this audience, I think we have to, sort of look, how are we delivering training? I think, training needs to be more accessible. I think there is, a really great model on looking at into just-in-time training. With building operators, I mean, there's only so much, education. There's only so much content they can digest in one sitting. I think if we can spread it out and we can provide the training, in a timely manner and in a fashion where they can use it right away and with an issue they're having, in the building at that moment, I think that'll be much more impactful, and we can really have, a really good amount of success moving forward.
Great, Bob, would you like to hop in on this one?
Well, I mean, I agree with most, well, everything that's said, but in terms of hands-on, I mean, for us, we developed a program with different levels, and if people want to pursue it, they can, and we see people go from concierge up to resident manager. I'm not saying everyone does that, but a fair number have been able to achieve that. In terms of, I always want to stay focused on the core concepts. But of course we have to adapt it to what's going on in the industry. And one of the two areas we're just seeing that it helps to engage the workers in terms of tracking their own building performance, logs and record keeping, tracking, and seeing what's going on. And then, as Michael mentioned, the continued need for coaching. And that's really an exciting combination. But again, the missing link in half the scenarios, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, is the whole organization, just to have the whole organization on board. But it's very exciting when they can start to engage and actually track their building performance and then bring in these technologies, bring in these concepts. So
I'd like to jump in on this because we keep hearing the whole organization topic, and there really is, as a trainer, developer of training, there's no mechanism that allows me to, other than just being persuasive, that allows me to get the whole organization in. There's no incentive specifically for the organization as opposed to the trainees. And I'd like to suggest maybe consideration of something like a performance requirement, that if an organization achieves a certain level of training that is shown by a certain number of people going through a certain number of steps, that the organization gets an incentive at that point. Kind of like what we do for an installation that achieves a certain performance target and it gets an additional level of incentive. So I'd like to just throw that out there for consideration.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Our next question, I think you might have read ahead, Michael. So, because I think it tees it up beautifully. So let's hop into, but before I go there, I do want to remind folks, drop your comments. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd be happy to call on you and have you speak if you'd like to. So feel free to use that panel on the right side of your screen. Our next question, which I think builds on your comment, Michael, is how can NYSERDA in New York State help support the design implementation of new training? And I think what you just talked about is one way to do that. You could incentivize that whole organization training. What other ideas does the panel have on how NYSERDA and the state can help with new training implementation? Any thoughts?
Well, we found that
Okay, Karen here. Money.
Money for infrastructure, right? Money.
Money for infrastructure.
Yeah,
Yes.
and simply,
we're experiencing it now. I'm sorry, Karen, did you want to go?
So let's, Bob, you actually came in first. So why don't you finish your thought and then I'll go, because
Okay.
Karen, I want you to be more granular than money. So I'll come to you after Bob. Thank you.
Well, we're experiencing it now. NYSERDA is funding a building management system. We were able to innovate and work with a company to develop boards for the training, and our members loved it. It's a little bit ahead of the curve because that's still not as prolific in the industry as maybe it needs to be, but it's been a lot of fun. We developed the boards, the curriculum, and our members really enjoy it, and the concepts are getting across, and using the technology is getting across. So we're seeing it. The flexibility would be key.
Great. And Karen, as I come to you, Michaela Topia agrees with you. She says, yes, you all need money and more funding. So, but can you be a little more, granular than money for me?
We need a raise.
yes, certainly.
Hop in, Karen. Hop in.
Yes, certainly. So really, I think it comes down to, again, the money to get the advanced equipment installed, to get the heat pumps installed so that now the operators have been trained and they continue to actually operate that equipment. It goes back to the chicken and egg. If you don't have the equipment there, train them all you want, but they lose the skills immediately because they can't use those skills. So we've got to get that equipment and get those changes in our physical buildings in order for us to have those people really do the work that they learned in the training.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Adam. I think to piggyback on that, quickly, I think as we get the new equipment into the buildings, there needs to be a much better handoff. The contractors that are installing the equipment and commissioning the equipment, and the operators, the operation staff that's going to be left with that equipment. So I think we need to, really make sure that there is that transfer of knowledge there as new systems and equipment get installed in buildings.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Let's see. So let me try one more question with you all, and then we'll move on to our last panel. What does a strategic workforce training plan for building decarbonization and electrification look like to you all? That's a really heady one, so it's a difficult one to end on. What does a strategic workforce training plan for building decarbonization and electrification look like? And I would say for operators, since that's the panel we're on. Any thoughts?
How about you, Ian?
I can throw out a quick comment. It may not be so insightful, but understanding the core concepts, understanding the new technologies, and performance-based metrics and O&M practices. So those are the layers I'm seeing at this point.
Thank you.
And a little more, just to add a little bit to that. That's right on it, Rob. But specifically, we expect to see heat pumps of different kinds of configurations and envelope work, something like passive house envelope work, which includes envelope and, as I said before, ventilation. So these are strategic elements that have to be considered, and they don't exist in the building stock now, by and large. So. And they will not, there's also a phasing here. We're at the back end of a whole process, but the building operator, interpreted more broadly, also needs skills for how to develop a project, how to develop a clean energy project. And that means skills in working with professionals to identify and define the retrofit. That's training that I don't know that really exists in any particular good place.
Thanks, Michael. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it has to start with awareness. I think, especially with the building operations personnel, I think, as they're not as aware of the local initiatives, the local laws, why we're doing these things, how does, their day-to-day operations impact the carbon performance of the building. I think we really need to start with that, and at least they understand the motivations, and then we can build upon that and introduce new technologies. But I think they really need to know why we're doing this, and I don't think it's as clear to them at this point.
Great. We did have a late breaking comment come in that I do want to at least put before you all. I think it's probably a softball, but we'll see if it is. Ross Gould asks, are you suggesting that possibly tying NYSERDA rebates for technology installation with training programs and grants is worth exploring?
That's a fascinating question. What happens when a contractor hands off the project to the building always includes some kind of training, and it's always done by the contractor in some varying degree of quality. It certainly doesn't get down to very basic fundamentals that might or might not be lacking. So some better structured way of intervening in the handoff to train the operator, and as I think Robert was referring to too, making sure they get good documentation on the systems. Operators never see sequences of operation that inform the control systems, for example. Those kinds of things, that intervention at that point would be is actually a very interesting point.
Awesome. Anyone else have a closing thought on that?
Karen here, I'll just say ditto. Yes, if you can somehow say, we're going to get this great equipment, and as part of it, there is quality training, because you're absolutely right. It is not typically the quality of training that we need in order for our operators to actually maintain and operate that equipment efficiently. Make that part of it, bring it together with the actual grant for the equipment and the incentives. I'd love it.
Awesome. Well, let me stop us there in light of time and thank this panel. Really appreciate all four of your inputs on this. And again, for the audience, hopefully some of these folks will be around for the last few minutes when we have a wider conversation. But let's move on to our final panel. So we started with an installation. We then talked about building operation, and perhaps out of order, we're going to close with design, which really comes first, right? But we're going to now move on to the design community. And we have two panelists here. The first is Thomas Reyes, and Thomas is the Director of Business Development at Trane New York City. Thomas is a leader in the firm's HVAC systems group, and he focuses on developing and integrating HVAC solutions for large, complex commercial projects with engineers and property owners. And you can see he has a pretty impressive list of projects here listed. And then secondly, if you'll flip the slide, please. We have Ian Shapiro, who's founder, chairman, partner at Tatum Engineering. As fascinating as all that sounds, and he founded Tatum in 1989, he's also the co-author of the books Green Building Illustrated and Energy Audits and Improvements for Commercial Buildings. So welcome to our panelists. I presume our next slide is actually that same grouping of gaps so that you can see it, and it's right before you. And so Thomas and Ian, we have a series of questions here to begin a conversation with you as well. And so the first one is, can you identify existing problems that may prohibit a project from being completed? Is it skilled labor, certified workers, lack of education, or is it due to the inability to access raw materials or equipment? What can the state do to help with the bottleneck and shortages? Who'd like to start?
Thomas, feel free to jump in, but I'm
okay. I can start with that one. I think it's more than one issue, and I know we love to look at one solution and say this will solve everything, but it's more than one. In terms of code enforcement, for example, I mean, right now the ASHRAE New York chapter is working with New York State in looking at potential modifications to code language. For example, the new stretch code that was just implemented, I should say just came into effect last week, it doesn't have clear language for, you know, where do you put a heat pump chiller? And so if you have a chiller that's now making hot water, that's a boiler, where do you put it? Does it classify as a chiller? It's not going to meet the same efficiency levels, but it's not exactly a boiler. So ASHRAE has actually developed a table that kind of rates those heat pump chillers and gives clarity on when you can use heating efficiency versus heating and cooling efficiency. And we're working with New York State to get that implemented into the boiler section of the code. So in terms of where the state can help, it's really kind of, you know, allowing the codes to kind of mimic what we're trying to do in a sense, because a design engineer, ultimately we stamp the drawings and we have to make sure that whatever design we put in meets the energy code. And if the code is gray, you'll find very few engineers that are willing to just, you know, live in that gray area and challenge that, because, you know, a code official can say, well, I don't see it that way. It's up to interpretation, and then boom, your entire project's on hold. So by having the codes kind of align with where we're going in terms of, you know, energy efficient electrification, that makes it easier for design engineers to specify different types of systems, equipment, and also stamp it with confidence that, you know, it's going to get approved and not stuck.
Great. Ian, anything to add on this one?
A few thoughts. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, thank you.
So it's Ian Shapiro with Tatum up in Ithaca. And our firm does two things. We do energy consulting. Maybe many of you know us that way. But we also do building design. So that's mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire safety, and structural. And so I'm really wearing my hat as a design firm rather than as an energy firm. I don't think we can underestimate the impact of COVID and a possible recession on the design community. What happens in a recession is that A&E firms, architect and engineering firms, are gutted. I mean, they lose 50% or more of their staff. It's a disaster. So we're talking about, you know, just surviving a recession and the COVID era. And then when we come out of it, you know, hiring again. And we haven't had a recession in over 10 years. So there's that. I've got a few other notes. Many people in our community, in the design community, as opposed to the energy consulting community, many design engineers are older. They're in their 50s and 60s and 70s. And that's several of our people are in their 60s and 70s. It's a kind of an old profession, mature profession, a fairly small profession. There's not many of us. And so it's very hard to recruit. I think 3 or 4 of our last hires have been immigrants. We cannot find qualified, you know, citizens. So we're recruiting. We recruited a young fellow from Saudi Arabia. We've recruited from India, several. And so there's major visa issues. One of our engineers right now is stuck in India, cannot come here because of COVID and visa issues. So, and some of our challenges are in the design community are really unique, and I'm, you know, you may not be aware of them. They're so different than energy consulting type challenges. Specialty training is hard to find. We do most of our training ourselves. We're talking about fairly old-fashioned skills, pipe sizing, duct sizing, equipment sizing, and then there's a need for our designers to not only have those base skills, but then also to be good green designers. So they need both. And many of our older designers don't have the green skills. So there's an opportunity there, but we need to train them to do the basic stuff, which we always had to do, but then also to do lead and heat pumps and stuff. Our risks and our liabilities are very high. It's very different than doing an energy audit. When we design a building, we have huge liability exposure, huge. The building has to stand up. The building has to stay comfortable. Most lawsuits around design of buildings have to do with comfort, have to do with heating and cooling, you know, and making sure they don't fall down. But so our liabilities are very high. And so, you know, with things like heat pumps, we need to convince clients that the building will be comfortable. Otherwise, we will get sued. So there's liability issues. I think that's it. Those are some of our design problems, challenges.
So thank you, Ian. So let's pivot to the next question, and then I'm going to actually add to it because it fits right in a comment. So what are the skills needed to work in this space? Are there parallel industries we can do crossover training with to better prepare the workforce? And then Michaela Topi offered up a comment that I think fits right in here, which is what are the workforce development strategies that can be implemented to recruit and retain more design engineers? I think she feels your pain, Ian, and is wondering what can we do about that. So, and of course, crossover training may be one of those strategies. So which of you would like to begin with this one?
Ian, you want to start? This one's closer to you.
Sure. Recruit.
Kind of builds off your comments. So
recruit and retain. Yeah, the key thing is to get through a possible recession, to get through the COVID era, to get through a recession without some major collapse where we lose half of our workforce. That's kind of the short-term urgent thing. So some of the federal assistance was great, was really well placed. We may need more of that. So far, we've retained all of our staff, but we have 2 people on furlough. They're coming back June 1st. Retaining people is like right now is huge. Then beyond that, to recruit more design engineers. Oh my gosh, you know, it's really a small and specialty field. It's maybe even smaller than the field for energy auditors. It's a tiny field. It's the potential need, if we're going to electrify New York City and upstate, the potential need is huge to be specifying heat pumps for all of these buildings. Plus renewables. So we could be talking about 10 or 20 years of a lot of work. And it's kind of a small bunch of us that are doing building design. Much of our work is new construction, right? So here we're talking about doing retrofit work, which we're happy to do and we can do. But so I think training around electrification. We still need training for renewables. We still have people wanting to put solar panels on their roofs, and we need engineers that can handle that. An old-fashioned electrical design engineer knows nothing about solar PV.
Are there any other industries that we might do some crossover training with? For either of you?
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead. You can finish up. Sorry.
No, please, Thomas.
Come on in, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say a lot of the engineers that we work with and our ASHA members here in New York City, I would say probably most of the larger firms, they have in-house training programs for their MEP engineers, because there is a gap, especially an age gap, between, you know, the senior principals and senior partners that have the wealth of knowledge and experience and the younger generation coming in. And to Ian's point, the field is relatively small, so we have a lot of volume. We've got, you know, the pace of business, especially in the city, is very high. So, you know, where do you spend the time to train and also get the job done? So it's a little bit of a challenge. Where NYSERDA, I believe, can help is if there is a more institutionalized training program that, you know, all engineers can share from with a standardized curriculum. You know, all the larger firms won't be investing money in creating their own training curriculum, their own training program, and they'll be able to kind of spread those resources out to hire more individuals because they don't have to also worry about them training in terms of where NYSERDA can help. In terms of cross training, I mean, absolutely, with respect to architects, you know, construction managers and bigger GCs. I mean, I can tell you right now, I know of 2 different firms that do cross training with, you know, the big construction managers, the big architecture firms, because so much of the work that we're doing is integrated, and it's not just one solution. Now that we're going to electrification, every kilowatt hour counts. So we need to make sure that the infrastructure can support that. The building envelope is tight, and we're using the most efficient solution, because ultimately, if you take a look at from an electrification standpoint, removing the boiler from the building, you're increasing the kilowatt demand no matter what you do. Now, you have to make sure you do that as efficiently as possible, but there's no getting around the fact that you're increasing electrical consumption. There are different ways for an existing building to reduce that electrical consumption, but ultimately, you know, it takes a team to look at. You have the MEP engineers, you have the architects, you have the facade manufacturer for the building envelope. Everyone has to work together to really make sure that the system jives. This is where system training is super important, because from an MEP standpoint, you know, we know our stuff, but does an architect understand the way we see it? Does an energy modeler understand the way our systems are going to work? They may or may not. Some of the best engineering, energy modeling minds in the city, they do have a good grasp on it, but you know, that's a handful of energy modelers that really understand the impact of changing around a chiller plant and using a chiller as a boiler, right? Very few of them will understand that. So cross-training would definitely help. And if there was an institutionalized training program that everyone can benefit from, I think that will reduce some of the costs that each firm is spending to train their own employees. And to Ian's point, allow us to kind of get through that recession and hire more, I should say, or retain more, because we don't have the expense of training ourselves.
Great. Anything you want to add to that, Ian?
No, I think Thomas covered it very well. I think that crossover between trades and design and contractors is good, with energy codes, best practices, and it also puts us on the same page, so that we're specifying things that contractors are familiar with. I like that.
So before I ask my next question of our panel here, I do want to say to the participants, here in another 5 to 8 minutes ish, I'm going to kind of open the floodgates for you and ask you, it needs to be about workforce, but it could be something that you want to double back to from session 1 or any of the 3 panels. So feel free to start. If you're more comfortable putting in the chat, drop something there. You could start raising your hands if you'd like to actually be taken off mute and talk. So just an early heads up to start building up a little bit of momentum towards that. And of course, if you have something about what either Ian or Thomas are talking about in this design community, please keep dropping those in there as well. Thanks. So the next question is, let's look outside of New York for a minute and talk about what we can learn from others. So are there other states or countries that have solved some of these issues around workforce training for the design community? What lessons can we learn? Who'd like to start?
I would say, I don't know if they've solved it. I know other states do different things, and the codes and standards are different. The relationship between engineers and contractors can vary from state to state. So, but I don't, from my perspective, I don't think any state has solved it, but I do think, you know, there is an overall perspective, I would say, from our national ASHRAE conferences. A lot of the engineers I speak with, they understand that there needs to be a better collaboration with architects, with engineers, with other, even acoustical engineers, other trades that revolve around the same project. they understand that. Now, how they implement that is different from state to state, but overall, there is an understanding that, you know, the greater good is served if we all work together.
Thanks, Thomas. Ian, anything to add on that one?
Well, Greg Hale has been working for several years on Retrofit New York, which is a multifamily retrofit initiative based on the Dutch program. So, I went over to Holland and saw that program. It's very interesting, although it's primarily what we call design build. They kind of have, it's contractor driven rather than design driven. I'm sorry, go ahead, sorry. Interesting initiative. We've learned from it. Some parts of it fit here, some don't. And we always are looking at California with their Title 24 energy codes. We kind of think they're maybe 10 years out in front of us. They're already net zero for new homes. So we're always kind of checking in to see what's happening in California.
Thanks for raising that. Alan Moore had just dropped that into the comments section so to make sure that we were aware of that. So thank you, Ian, for grabbing that. It sounded, Thomas, like you wanted to hop back in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Ian, to your point, you know, the concept of design build, I think has taken off further in other states outside of New York. I know, and I hear all the time from contractors, you know, they say it's so much easier working in Jersey with design build than working in New York City. And New York City has a little bit of a infrastructure issue to deal with in terms of, you know, we have strong unions, strong representation, and there is a culture of the way business has been done. However, there have been examples in the city where big major projects, you know, kind of follow a design build scenario. I think they call it a triple P process, a public-private partnership. But it's starting to move forward in New York. I know the design build concept does move better outside of just outside the city. Even in New Jersey, it is much more prevalent than inside the city.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Let me give us one more question here, and this is kind of the what's getting in the way question. So, you know, are there existing regs or tariffs that are prohibiting project completion that from the design, you know, that should be analyzed? What's getting in the way?
I referred to it earlier, but you know, our current federal hostility to immigrants is not a good thing. We, as an engineering community, we will always, and we have to, by law, we have to give preference to American citizens. But the bottom line is, if we don't have access to immigrant engineers, we're going to get choked. We are very reliant on foreign engineers. Very reliant. I'm telling you, maybe our last 5 hires, we could not find qualified American citizens, and they're all immigrants, and they're on every kind of visa. They're on H-1B, they're on practical training. I don't even understand all of the letters that we use. And so the federal hostility to immigrants is not a good thing. And what we need is for Indians not to fear that they're going to need to wait 10 years for a green card. That's actually quite urgent for us.
Thank you, Ian. Thomas, anything you see? Yep.
I think one thing I see, not necessarily a tariff per se, but going back to someone's comment earlier about the attractiveness of the role. You know, I hear stories from big construction managers and MEP firms that they're losing top talent to Facebook. You know, it's just it's crazy to think that an engineer would leave MEP and go to Facebook, but you know, we're not competing with the traditional competition. We're competing with tech firms, you know, and making sure that the role of an MEP engineer is a little bit more, you know, glamorous or more attractive. I mean, that, you know, there has to be a marketing plan to that as well. So it's not a tariff, but it's a barrier where you're up against tech firms that, number one, have a ton of cash to spend, and number two, you know, they're younger, they're faster, they're much more attractive to someone coming out of school as a top talent that can go anywhere. So I think from a marketability standpoint, the MEP industry needs to do a better job to market what we do and how important we really are.
Great. Let me get a reaction from you. We have a comment that came in, I believe, to this question about what's getting in the way, and get your reaction to it. So Alan Moore writes, construction specifications that maintain third-party representation for commissioning. Does that get in the way of completing these projects?
That's a loaded question, and I would say from my perspective, it really depends on the client. So if you have a building owner that understands and has a high level of trust for the contracting chain, that's not a problem. But when owners, sometimes they want to go as cost effective as possible, so they hire people that or companies that may or may not be the most reputable, and they want to make sure that, hey, you know what, I'm going to hire this person third party because ultimately the building has to work. Like Ian said, we get sued for comfort issues, and if the building falls down, they need to make sure it works. So if there is a little bit of, I should say, a lack of trust in that contracting chain, you will see that third-party commissioning agent become more, could be more of a problem. Whereas if there is a lot of trust in the chain, and you have an owner that's working with an engineer and an architect, and they've done projects before, things are going smoothly, that does not become an issue. So my answer is, from a perspective, is it depends. I don't think it's across the board, but it really depends on the trust that the contracting chain, has developed on the project.
Great, thanks. Ian, anything you want to add to that?
I think Thomas hit it correctly. It's complicated. We see, generally speaking, lead kind of set the standard for requiring third-party commissioning. So we try to do that. It's not a bad idea, and in some instances, I think Thomas was 100% correct. It's complicated.
Great. So I am actually going to ask you one more question, because we've come to that point where we can open it up. So far, I don't have any comments or hands up. So because of that, I'm going to take advantage of the two of you and ask you one more question, since you're alive and online. So the last question I would ask the two of you is, how often are the benefits of electrification discussed during project design?
Ian, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, we do work across the state, but most of our work, design work, is in the Tompkins County. It's Ithaca. Ithaca is very unusual. They call us 15 square miles surrounded by reality. So we're a very, we're a progressive college town, and heat pumps have taken off. I mean, we have thousands of heat pumps. Virtually every new multifamily building is air source heat pumps. And so we're unusual, but in that way, maybe we are where the rest of the state is headed. So we discuss electrification on every project, and it's good. It's exciting. There are still obstacles. We have issues of perception. So we have horror stories from the 1980s with air source heat pumps not providing heat. When it's cold outside, we have to overcome those. Although we are successfully installing air source heat pumps without any backup, no backup electric resistance, no fossil fuel backup, and we're far colder than New York City. So our comfort level, our confidence in heat pumps has exploded. And so has the confidence of developers. There's a kind of like a learning curve. With 2 or 3 years of experience, we have developers who don't care anything about green, and they've gone with heat pumps and they love them. They're not going back. So there's a kind of a hopeful story for new construction. Not seeing it much yet in renovation. So issues of perception. Technology is not understood a little bit. And then the decision making takes a long time because people are still learning. So, what is a heat pump? How does it work? Does it really work that way? What do you mean it's like a refrigerator in a kitchen, So we've tried all different kinds of ways of explaining it, but once they get it, there's no turning back, which is great.
Great. That's very helpful. Thomas, any last thought on this from you?
Yeah, I would echo the same thing when it comes to new construction. I mean, post Local Law 97, every single project that's new construction, we look at electrification, every single one. It doesn't matter whether it's a 2 million square foot tower, every single one we look at, not having a boiler or not being primarily dependent on the boiler. You'll have backups, but, not having a boiler as a primary use. It's significantly more challenging the bigger the building, but from new construction perspective, every single project is looked at that way. It is much harder on the retrofit side with an existing building. The politics come into play, whether the building meets Local Law 97 levels, for 2024 levels, 2030 levels or not. Owners make decisions whether or not, for example, if a building through minor renovations can meet the 2024 levels, an owner will renovate just to meet that, because chances are by 2030 they won't own the building, so they don't want to fully commit. Now, if they are going to own the infrastructure for the foreseeable future, they want to make sure that they can meet those levels at 2030 and beyond. So it really depends on the ownership of the building, and whether or not they're going to hold on to the building. So existing buildings are a little bit more complicated, but from new construction, it's electrification all the way.
Great, thanks. And we have a late breaking comment from John Shivako, saying he loves air source heat pumps, but building bigger buildings and district systems will really need water source heat pumps for energy recovery between buildings and to access multiple sources and sinks, including the air. And you don't need to comment, but if you'd like to, because it was a comment from him, do you agree, disagree, have a different thought, either of you?
I will taking a stab at it, and I will not dive too deep into the manufacturer hat. I'm going to keep my ASHRAE hat on. When it comes to water source heat pumps, we have seen designs, and we've drawn out designs where you can get that real harmonious balance. If the loads are there on the heating side and the cooling side simultaneously, a water source heat pump can be a super efficient solution. I mean, we're talking COP levels of 8, 9 into the 11s, depending on how they're used. If there's a balanced load, the challenge really is whether or not there's balanced heating and cooling loads. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But the water source heat pump, the heat pump solution in general, is being overhauled from every manufacturer, not just us, but it does have tremendous potential down the road in the next couple of years. It really does.
Thanks. Ian, any thoughts on that comment?
I agree. It's not just air source heat pumps. We need water source heat pumps as well. We really need a PTAC heat pump, a good cold climate PTAC heat pump. There is nothing out there that comes close. And high-rise buildings, like Thomas said, are a challenge. We can't run those air source heat pumps, unless we do what they're doing overseas, which is to put these recessed balconies with louvers. But you don't have enough room on the roof, and the pipe runs are too long. So we've got challenges with large buildings. Definitely there's a place for water source heat pumps. I think we can talk about heat pumps in general. We have to be careful. It's getting a little geeky. We have to be careful with